hurry isn't just the sign of a disordered schedule, it's the sign of a disordered heart. Our schedule, if it is overcrowded and overdone, often tells us much about kind of disordered priorities and emotional needs in our own heart, whether or not we're getting our identity from what we accomplish, or whether or not everybody's happy with us, or people think of us, or how we look, or how much influence we have, or whatever, nonsense it is that in our deep fear we go after. And really, it's just our deepest fears: are we loved?
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, where we help you lead with integrity at home, at work, and in the community.
I'm Tara Matson, a licensed marriage and family therapist and executive coach.
And I'm Jeff Matson, an executive coach and organizational development professional.
Together, we bring you 2 decades of experience in leader development and trauma-informed therapy. We're so excited you are here as we help you become the leader you would follow.
John Mark, it's great to have you with us today.
It's an honor to be along. I love the work you do and happy to chat, and especially into this subject.
Before we dive in, it's fun for our audience to hear a little bit about our guests, and tell us what you're passionate about these days and what you're doing for fun.
What's been fun has been just doing some beautiful outdoor stuff. We do a fun thing at our staff for the church I'm a part of. We noticed a number of years ago that in the industrialized kind of knowledge worker West, there's not really seasons to the year. Like an agrarian worker, there's all these agrarian metaphors in the New Testament about kind of seasons of harvest and sowing and reaping, and in the knowledge economy or in the industrial economy, there's not really seasons. If you're a farmer, at least prior to the modern era, there was harvest season where you wake up in the morning and you work straight till sunset. And then there was winter where you were, I don't know what you were doing, but in the northern hemisphere, mending fences or, waiting for the snow to melt or taking care of your cows or whatever, but they were not as busy and exhausting. And so those rhythms have really been lost in the modern world, is kind of rhythmless, and technology and electricity and the internet make that all the more, even the rhythm of the 9 to 5 is a dying thing because of the smartphone and the internet, email. So we do a thing every August and December called fallow season, where it's like our equivalent of like farmers just not doing much, So in August, we all get 3-day weekends and we work at the office. You have to be out of the office by 5 p.m. at the absolute latest. Most of us more like 4. So normally we do a lot of eating out and stuff in the city, not this year, but we're just doing a lot of camping. So every weekend I've been taking one of my kids camping, doing like tomorrow night, we're doing a overnight to Mount Jefferson Wilderness with my middle boy, and just some stuff like that, going to the beach, going to Savi Island, going hiking, sitting outside. We just got a fire pit. We've been doing lots of family conversations around the fire pit in the backyard. Been really fun.
So good.
Love that.
So good. Yeah. So much has been crammed into this year.
Yes.
So I'm glad all those small pieces, the simplicity of a fire and a good conversation probably is so enriching in the midst of all the heavy. So there's a lot that you've gone through in your season as a pastor. And in your latest book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, you explain a little bit more about an integrity gap that you came face to face with. I think you said you were 33 years old. Would you share with our audience a little bit about that experience of what really kind of was a turning point, even at what some people might say was the top of your game as far as a social influencer, a pastor, a teacher, an author?
Yeah, honestly, it's not that unique of a story. It's become a really common trope for leaders in the modern world and even pastors in the modern world. The short version is a number of years ago, 17 years ago now, I've been at the church, but my dad and I, we planted a church out in Beaverton on the west side of the city in the suburbs, and it just grew extraordinarily fast and became a very large church in just a couple of years. By my late 20s, I was the lead pastor of, we had 93 people on staff, and I was preaching 6 times on a Sunday, and absolute kind of workaholic hustle mega church culture. And or at least our church culture was. And yeah, it's just a very common thing of, gaining a church and losing your soul, and realizing that by external metrics of success based on American values, yeah, things were going amazing, bigger and better. But by values of the kingdom of God as defined by Jesus in Matthew 5, 6, and 7? Am I becoming that kind of a person we read about in the Sermon on the Mount? And by the internal kind of reality of what's my soul like, what's my inner life like, what was my marriage, my family, my parenting, my friendship like, it was dismal and in decline, and I was headed toward a nervous breakdown at best, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a larger and larger gap between kind of the spiritual life that I was describing to people and my actual felt experience of life as a pastor.
Mm.
Appreciate the candid response, and it's so true. There's leaders in our sphere of influence that we've been walking with, and over the last 2 decades, coming right out of ministry in church settings and parachurch settings, and a lot of folks that actually don't know Christ as well, but specifically those that do, that could tell that story as well. And you're right, it is more common. You've been at this, and so have we, to try to make that less common in helping people. Um,
Right.
Often leaders, they won't do the needed internal work that you just begin to just describe needed to happen for you. And it'll be great to hear more about that, to shift their way of doing leadership because they know the cost or the consequences. And it
Right.
comes to that breaking point, doesn't it? I mean, a nervous breakdown at best might be, is what I heard you say. And well, what was that like for you the moment you decided it was time to change your life and you knew the cost or consequences of saying no more of this hurried way?
You know, honestly, it was scary. It was scary because it's all I'd ever known. And in order for at that point for me, I was too far down the path into a life of kind of workaholism and hurry and overcommitment that there was no like, make a few tweaks and things will be better. It required, some pretty drastic changes. And in my case, I had to basically resign slash demote myself from my job. It was honestly scary. It's all I had ever known. And, one of the things that John Ortberg had that great line, hurry isn't just the sign of a disordered schedule, it's the sign of a disordered heart. Meaning, often our schedule, if it is overcrowded and overdone, often tells us much about, kind of disordered priorities and emotional needs in our own heart, whether or not we're getting our identity from what we accomplish, or whether or not everybody's happy with us, or people think of us, or how we look, or how much influence we have, or whatever, nonsense it is that in our deep fear we go after. And really, it's just our deepest fear is, are we loved? Are we loved as we are with all of our shadow and problems and issues? So I think it was honestly just scary. It's all I'd ever known. Somewhere I bought into the lie, that take up your cross and follow me meant sacrifice your emotional health on the altar of church planting. I don't know where I picked that up. I wasn't taught that explicitly. I likely was kind of taught that, or at least I caught it implicitly. But somehow I bought into that lie. And the truth was that a church rarely, if ever, and this is true, I think, of any organization or even just a family unit, it rarely, if ever, rises above the level of emotional health and spiritual maturity of its highest levels of leaders. And so, as Pete Scazzaro puts it, as the leaders go, so goes the church. And
Mm.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that was scary because I think I thought I was sacrificing my soul's health for the good of the church. And then I realized, oh no, I'm setting the tone and the whole church is following me down this, emotional level. Not the whole church, but I'm influencing them in the wrong way. So it was honestly scary. It required some big identity work. Am I willing to give up stuff? Am I willing to step out in faith? Am I willing to make less money and have less clout, all of that. So it was really scary. And in hindsight, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I just chuckle that it was such a big deal for me at the time. But at the time, felt like a scary, massive life decision.
Yeah, you have great empathy for all that mountain looks like on one side, and on the other side, you are so grateful. I mean, it's God's grace that you were able to hear it in the way that it it landed on you. And the shift has been enormous. And you're right, the church does put out a lot of phrases that I think it misunderstood, like you said, picking up your cross, dying to ourself. But the fruit on the vine doesn't look exactly what God intended for our lives, our families, and our ministries, the things that you're talking about. And especially as leaders, we don't tune into our limits. And I love that you speak to that quite a bit in your podcast and in your recent book. Speak to what a healthy leader, how they know that they're living out of their limits and why that's such a beautiful part of walking with Christ.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer. Maybe because I think living and leading out of your limits is not necessarily like there's not clear cut boundaries, like you are or you aren't. When you talk about emotional health, you set people up for disillusionment if you talk about it as there's this thing out there that you can achieve and you're either achieving it or not achieving it. It's more like a gradient, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
a
It's a journey.
spectrum of,
Yeah.
yes, there's a level of emotional health that none of us will ever get to on one side and a level of emotional unhealth on the other that hopefully we never get to. And we all live in the middle in between. And honestly, it goes up and down based on the time of day and the pressures of that week and your stage of life. And you know what I mean? Obviously, you're going to feel less emotionally healthy if you randomly, get a phone call saying one of your parents was just diagnosed with cancer, as happened to my best friend. Or he's probably not feeling as emotionally healthy and things that are outside of your control. So, so all that to say, I think we set people up for success when they if you think in a black and white binary kind of, I'm either emotionally healthy or I'm not. I'm living and leading out of my limitations or I'm not. I think the important thing is to have that as a value and to always be moving toward the ideal of an emotionally healthy, high integrity leader who is kind of living out of their limitations. But that's the idea. It's aspirational. Like we move in that direction. That's our North Star that we navigate by. But life is a slow kind of slog journey with ups and downs. And there are times when the clouds cover over that North Star, if that makes sense. So I think the main way that I just not to give a too Christian of an answer, and I don't apologize for being a Christian, but an easy answer just biblically would just be the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. If you were to imagine those each as kind of little dials on your emotional, relational dashboard, and those are not emotions per se. I think they're best understood as dispositions of those who take on the inner life of Jesus himself in their own body. And so when you're walking in the Spirit, which is a New Testament way of saying living inside your limitations with Jesus, then you become the kind of person who just the almost atmosphere around you at an emotional and even spiritual or relational level is loving and joyful and patient and kind and gentle. And so if you were to imagine kind of a little dial of gentleness to harshness, or love to narcissism or joy to a morose cynicism, where are you in there is probably a good little litmus test for, am I living inside my limitations? So like the first, with my personality and my personal psychosis, the first kind of warning sign is when I get irritable or curt with my family, that's a sure sign that I'm probably overtired, too much in a hurry, and not living inside my limitations. If I snap at my kid really easy or I'm rude to my wife, that's a really good probably indicator. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You need to go. You need to recheck and rest and, come back to center.
So appreciate what you said about this being really like almost like taking the pulse. I mean, and framing it this way, we definitely agree and are right beside you is in the idea that even integrity and living within limits, if you will, it's not an event. I mean, it's a lifestyle. Is what we say, and
Right.
it really is a choice you make in every moment, and there are ups and downs and dips and mountaintops, and hopefully over time that there is a gradient, an incline, right, towards that goal of becoming more like Jesus, and it's a process, and no matter if you know him or not, everybody is on that spectrum, and so appreciate you saying that the way you did, and I would say, looking at this, you have a family, you're married, and if we asked your wife and kids, what would they say is the primary difference in your home today versus before the the big shift that happened for you, and the attention that you began to give to face that scary change.
Well, my wife and my children could give you all the dirt on me, so
As could ours,
I
as
I
could ours, John Mark.
I don't think it would be this flowing review of he's become the new, like, you know, Christian Gandhi. Although actually, rumor has it like that Gandhi was not kind to his family. So even Gandhi's not Gandhi, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. The last 6 months, I've been more hurried and more digitally connected than I have been in years. So I'm definitely not at my best.
It's all getting tested.
Yes, exactly, and that's real life. Life is just
Right.
because you write a book on hurry or the integrity gap doesn't mean that you have that figured out,
That's
and
right.
Really? I thought writing the
yeah.
book, we were done.
Oh, if only human change was as simple as reading a book or even writing a book. If only that, if you could just write your way into a different personhood, that would be amazing. It's not that easy though. But all that to say, I think my wife and my kids, I think they would say that I'm more loving and more joyful than I was before. But again, you have to dispel the magical thinking of, hey, there's a silver bullet and do these three things and you'll all of a sudden become an always happy, always kind, always loving person. That's not reality. That's not the spiritual journey, as you two know more than anybody. As your expertise is the journey of the soul in relationship to God and to others, and it's a lifelong journey. And there are moments of just extreme breakthrough and acceleration and freedom. And I think that's what, the last 5, 6, 7 years have been for me. But on the flip side, life is hard and life comes, and there are just seasons that are difficult. And that's where, some of the personality theories that help you understand this is your personality when you're relaxed and this is your personality under stress can be enormously helpful, to just kind of notice those patterns and try to meet Jesus in those patterns and let him change you.
Just want to say how I think a lot of people in our audience are going to listen to that and what you've just shared, and even the honesty and taking your own pulse there and thinking what your family might say, and just find it really refreshing and honest. And there's one of the big critiques, of course, as you're very aware of people that just have a disdain for the church or for pastors or for Christians is their feeling and sense of inauthenticity and hypocrisy. And
Yes.
you just address that in such a clear, honest way, covertly, but just nailing it. And humans can relate to what you just shared, and it just reveals that, Jesus it changes everything, but it doesn't change the challenge of facing real life and the
Yeah.
ups and downs, and the ebbs and flows, and of becoming more like him as he works within us to try to help us in that journey. And I just appreciate that, John
Yes.
Mark.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even just thinking about the fact that you're in the middle of such intense time, you've been more digitally connected than you want to be. But I do know that you are talking about how practical this gets in terms of staying connected. Sometimes we over spiritualize in a way where we,
Yes.
think just being on our knees
Hmm.
all day would be amazing, right? If we could just pray all day and avoid people altogether, we'd probably be the most holy.
We'd be. Yes, exactly.
But I love how practical, and even recently, I mean, John Mark, I've emailed you several times over the last months, and honestly, I was surprised. I don't know why, but your response in your email, it's auto reply, and it says, I only check my emails once a week. So be patient with my response. And I was blown away in that you are highly needed. Lots of people are in your wake of influence, and it's more extreme right now, I know, even with the needs of the greater church. But I just appreciate it so much. It actually, that model to me, like, yeah, I don't have to hurry back to my own emails. Like, slow down, Tara. It's okay. John Mark takes a week. It could take an hour. Chill.
Thank you, John Mark.
Yeah. Just,
Yeah.
it was so good. I love
Uh,
how practical that tool right there was. So get a little more practical. You're in a season of a little bit more hurry. Things are shifting again. What are some of your first go-tos when you start to go, okay, I'm recognizing things are getting a little bit out of whack. I'm getting a little more irritable. I may be responding in shortness. What are those practical tools that you start putting back into place to help you get to that place where you want to be connected more to God's rhythm, His and the fruits of the Spirit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a firm believer in what, followers of Jesus have long called a rule of life. And that's language that is totally alien to secular people and honestly very strange to most Protestant people or a lot of modern Christians. But it's very ancient common language that goes back likely to the second century, and it's notice it's rule singular of life, not rule plurals for life. It's not a list of rules, but a rule of life. And the original Latin word was regula, which is where we get our English words like regular, ruler, and it just meant a straight piece of wood. And most scholars, not all, but argue that it was likely the word used for a trellis in a vineyard. And if you think about Jesus kind of teaching on spiritual formation in John 15, which is that, his famous line about I'm the vine, you are the branches, abide in me and you will bear much fruit, which is a metaphor of, a vineyard, a
Mm.
winery. And I think you guys live out in wine country, right? So you're
Yeah.
familiar
Amen.
with that.
Hmm.
So for a vine to, bear the maximum amount of fruit, it has to have a trellis, something, this kind of support structure to hold it up off the ground and to index its growth in the right direction and get it the water and the sunshine that it needs. And without that, it will bear a fraction of the fruit that it's capable of. It will be, open and vulnerable to wild animals, to disease, to damage, and so ancient Christians said, and if abide in the vine, that's how we bear fruit. That's how we become people who bear the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, and so on. Then we need some kind of a trellis or a support structure to organize our life around abiding. So a rule of life, I would just define, as a schedule and a set of practices and relational rhythms that make space for a life of abiding and really enable us to live in alignment with our deepest kind of heart's desires for the kind of people that we want to become and the kind of things that we want to give our life and our work and our energy and attention to. So for me, I have a rule of life, and that's, there's lots of conversation there, and there's not a right way to do it. It will depend on the city you live in and the era you live in and your stage of life and your personality and your work and all of that. But my rule of life has a number of boundaries in it. And when I transgress those boundaries, I get in trouble. And so I have a lot of kind of practices and just life rhythms that kind of put a stop to like the level of busyness that's allowed in. So Sabbath would be an obvious example. From Friday evening at 6 p.m. till Saturday evening at 6 p.m., my phone is off. My laptop is closed. I'm not doing work. I'm not doing laundry other than like cooking because I like to cook, making brunch or dinner. I am just sleeping and reading fiction and poetry and chatting with my kids around the fire pit and, praying, just enjoying my life before God. That's a boundary. I know that no matter what happens, a full 24 hours every single week where I am offline and just present to God and my own soul and my loved ones. Another boundary would be what Angie Crouch calls parenting your phone. So this one's a little harder, but I attempt to, put my phone to bed, so to speak. I put it in another room, in a charger, out of sight, out of mind. It's not my alarm clock at
Night,
8:30
night.
every night. Night, like a little child, sleep well, and put it to bed, so to speak. And it's not allowed up until after at least I've had time every morning in quiet prayer over a cup of coffee and some time to read before I will even look at it, unless if there's, an emergency or something like that. So, just little boundaries like that give me kind of space that I know is built in. So those are some boundaries, there's lots more, but those are some very practical boundaries for me.
They're so good, and they have to be that clear cut, because we do have a way to, wiggle out of those, and there's grace for
Oh
the
yeah.
seasons, like you were saying, but just always knowing what they are.
Yes, aspiration will really not get you far. I mean, you're a therapist. You understand the dynamics of human change better than I do. And the inability of willpower and inspiration to result in really any kind of long-term deep change, is well documented, not just by social psychologists, but by just the human experience. You live for a while and you realize, wow, willpower and inspiration, they only work on really small changes. They don't work on deep changes. They don't help you live against the grain and the flow of culture. You have to have habits and more community and grace from God.
Amen. I know the common, I'll start on Monday and then I'll start
Yes,
next.
exactly.
Or
Or
January
I'll
1st.
try. I'll try
Last year.
harder.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, willpower. Yeah. But that is, God grows the fruit in us. And it's that submission, it's that honesty, it's staying connected to those signals, those signs, those warning signs that you're saying.
And
And then having the
relationship.
trellis in place
Yeah.
and the people
Mm-hmm.
and that unhurried time with God and with others.
John Mark, as we get to the finish line here a little bit, what do you sense that leaders are needing the most right now? I mean, let's give our audience and those that are in leadership roles, whether it's moms or CEOs here, what kind of encouragement can you give them today, and at your sensing?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's hard to know that for everyone. I mean, a couple things that come to mind are hope, rest, and space. Hope. There's a lot of despair in the world right now. On one hand, our world has really turned to kind of what Leslie Newbegin called the political religions, and both the right and the left have really put so much of their emotional well-being and their hope for the future of the world on, their prospective political parties and really political ideologies that both on the right and the left have become quasi-religions. You can make a strong case that religion hasn't gone away. It's just been moved from, Christianity, and for the most part in America, to politics. And it's not a hopeful time for the political future of America, whatever side you're on.
Exactly.
And so I think there's a lot of despair, a lot of Christians who feel like, man, are we heading into like a kind of digital dark ages where, the cultural persecution will ramp up and Orthodox, faith will become more and more, not just unpopular, but maybe even more so. So I think we need hope that God is at work and is doing good things, and whatever comes in the political future of America, that we have a deep hope in Jesus, and that He's with us, and He's with us in this pain and this suffering, and He will bring good things out of this, no matter what happens or doesn't happen in the future. The other thing is rest. We're just tired. Like when I talk to leaders and pastors, you're just tired. There's a kind of crisis. We're in a crisis. And, when you're in the acute crisis, you can live at a certain speed and a certain level of connectivity and a certain level of emotional involvement. For 2 months maybe, but you can't live that way for 2 years. And we don't know how long this will be. Will it all be over by winter, or will it be another year after that? We don't know, but you can't live at that level, for a chronic crisis. You have to reposition. You have to find ways to go golfing, or what I mean, take a night off and have a glass of wine with your spouse, or
Stare at
take
a
a
fire.
Sabbath. Yeah.
Mhm.
Stare at a fire. You got to find that stuff. This is not a sprint. This is a long, long ultra marathon that is COVID-19. So, and the other thing I think is just some space, some distance. What's been really hard, and because of the volatility of the world, in particular in my city, it's been really hard to disconnect both digitally and mentally and emotionally. I normally take a long vacation every single summer. I normally do 21 days, 3 weeks with my phone completely off, not even a text message, much less social media or the news. But obviously, I can't do that right now. You know what I mean? My vacation was scheduled for the week after George Floyd was killed.
Oh,
So it was definitely not a time when I could just disappear for 21 days.
Right.
So I think that break, we have to find little pockets where we can be offline for a period of time and just kind of disconnect and let God meet us in our soul. So yeah, I think, cultivating hope, where we actually have a responsibility for that as followers of Jesus, and carving out time for rest and finding ways to disconnect, even if it's not in an ideal situation. I think these are really important kind of decisions and practices for us.
They are. Thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to connect with us here on our podcast. It's a real privilege to talk with you, John Mark. I've heard so many great things about you. Look forward to meeting you face to face at one day.
Yes,
And,
same here.
this has been a treat. Thank you.
Well, we are so privileged to get to hear from John Mark. And if you want to learn more from him, you can visit his website at johnmarkcomer.com, where you can find his teachings, podcast, his books. There's just so much more that could be unpacked for such a time as this. John Mark, it's fun to talk with someone from our own community. We've actually been working in the same greater Portland area for close to 20 years, and we know many of the same people. And in fact, we've worked with many of those who have been directly impacted by you. And we can just see the ripple effect of what God has been doing in your story, even back when you were going through that really hard time in your story to now. We can see some huge shifts in the people that you shepherd. And it's just really powerful and a great testament to what God's doing. So we just want to say thank you for your continued example of shrinking your own integrity gap.
Thank you.
And being honest about your journey as a leader as you keep in step with the way of Jesus. So thank you.
Oh, it's my honor. And thank you for the work you do. Thank you that you're calling to this. Maybe one last story to close, and I'll sign off. But, I remember when my firstborn son, who is about to turn 15 on Tuesday, he starts high school. So that's a big, big thing.
It's big.
And when my lovely wife was pregnant with our first son, I actually got really scared. I'm a pastor's kid. But I was aware that, pastors' kids have this horrible reputation, for just being kind of rabble rousers, and I never really understood that. I had a good relationship with my parents, and I was really confused. Like you would think that if pastors are the spiritual leaders of the church, that their kids should be at least middle of the bell curve, and hopefully on the positive side, and then not like they have to be perfect or anything, but you'd hope they'd be, better than average, maybe, and not worse. And so I was really scared. And I remember I went around and I asked, half a dozen or so kind of older, wiser leaders, why is that? In an attempt to kind of avoid it in my own kids. And it was really interesting. I had a couple different, theories going in, like maybe it's because of how many hours they have to work, or the criticism of people, or feeling like they're always in the spotlight. And none of my theories were validated. Every single person I asked gave me the exact same answer without even thinking about it. They said it's because of hypocrisy. When dad or mom is one person on stage and another person at home, public and private are not the same. It's it does great damage to the soul of their children. And they were talking about, what you call the integrity gap, and the need to shrink it. So I'm a firm believer in that, and even as a parent, not that I have it down, but man, do I recognize that living with integrity in the true sense of the word, where you are integrated, your past, your present, your future, your public life, your private life is as integrated as possible. Man, I so believe in that. So thank you for the work that you do. It's incredibly important.
No, you're welcome. Yeah, we're in a journey together, and it's wonderful when we can connect and link arms in the body of Christ towards this, and that we can help this and the next generation that's coming up cast a vision and for what this can look like, and yet have an appropriate level of fear and trepidation as about leadership, but health in a healthy sense, submitting that to Christ and with Him and encourage, face the days and face their integrity gaps and shrink it in this life as much as possible. And Grace was the only one that didn't have the gap. And in this life, it's a noble pursuit, whether you are a follower of Jesus yet or you're not, and you don't know about this. Every person can get behind this idea of alignment between what we say we're about and what we do. And everyone in our wake serves to benefit when we do that. So it's a noble pursuit. And if you're listening to this and you're wanting to join a movement of leaders who are longing to live and lead with greater integrity in a world desperate for wholehearted leadership, we did write this book, and it's come out of a place of a deep well over the last 2 decades, and our own journeys are in there as well. Pre-order your copy of Shrinking the Integrity Gap today. You can invite a friend, a colleague, a spouse, someone you're mentoring to read this with you. This is designed to do what we've been talking about today, to help us in our journeys and of living an honorable life, but also a life that is integrated so that people can be as healthy as possible. And it's a process. So you can learn more at www.livingwholehearted.com. And again, John Mark, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to connecting again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.